We're going to start painting our little girl's features. First, we're going to fill in her eyes with white. I'm just using a small flat shader brush to fill these in with an even coat of white. And then as we're working with the white, we're going to dry brush some white in the center of her face to start sculpting her face a little bit. So we're going to run some up the bridge of her nose, across the top of her lip on her chin, on both sides of her cheeks and across her forehead. I'm just using this little flat brush and just lightly dry brushing this white. We'll smooth this out a little bit later with some additional, just a lighter colored flesh, but this will give us a start to sculpting her face. I'm just sort of scrubbing this in. Let's add a little bit down to the front of her neck. Now we're painting in her pupils with some burnt sienna. This will take a couple of coats, so this first one will just be a little transparent. We're going to draw in her lips with a pink mix. I'm using like a number 2 round brush, and these are very delicate, so just lightly sketch the upper lip in. It's kind of a little bow shape, and then we're going to add just a little hint of a bottom lip. A second coat on her irises with the burnt sienna. Now we're going to mix up some light flesh. And I'm just using some warm white and burnt sienna, and we're going to use a larger angle or flat brush to start softening those highlights in the center of her face. This will tone down that white a little bit and soften it into our flesh, our medium flesh color that we used for her face. Just scrub that out so we have soft edges. But you can see now where her nose area and chin and forehead are starting to come forward because they're lighter. She's getting a more sculpted look. Now I'm adding some shading around the edges of her head. This is the same mix of warm white plus some burnt sienna, but just we're using a little more burnt sienna to give it a little darker shade. So just soften that into the sides of and top of her head. With some of our pink mix, we're going to just add a little nose. This is just a little hint of a nose. It's sort of a little upside down U. And then we're going to shade her lips with some of the alizarin crimson. So I'm just shading at the bottom of the top lip and just a little bit at the bottom of the lower lip. Again, another coat on her eyes. This is the burnt sienna. And now we're going to add some white dots to her collar for decoration. I'm using a short round brush to stencil these in. These are about probably 1/8 to 1/4 inch dots, and you can use the warm white or you can use white, either one. Just keep repositioning your stencil to fill in that little scalloped collar with dots. Okay, now that's done, we're going to add some pupils into her eyes. We're using black, and these are just sort of little circles in the center of her irises. And we're going to side load with some white plus a touch of burnt sienna. You know, we want to mix up this real light flesh color, and we're going to highlight the top of her lip. And I'm just turning this up on the corners to give her a slight little uplift to the corners of her mouth so that it looks like she's smiling. We'll reinforce this in a minute with some outlining. And we can also highlight right above her nose. And add a little eyelid above her eyes. Again, this is the very light flesh mix. If it needs to be lighter above her eyes, you can add a little bit more of the warm white and do this little eyelid. It's only about 1/8 of an inch above her eye. With some more pink, we're going to extend the corners of her mouth so that we can get that little smile effect. Keep this very soft and very fine. We don't want a real heavy mouth on her. You can add a little highlight to her bottom lip with some light pink and back along her top lip. We're going to mix up a little more flesh color with some burnt sienna and a little bit of our warm white. I'm just brush mixing on the palette. And we're going to shade. This is a little darker flesh than what we used for the background. And we want to shade above her eyelid. This is just to add a little bit more definition to that eyelid. And now we're going to mix up some black and some burnt sienna to outline the iris. I want just a little darker edge around the iris of her eye. If you look at your eye in the mirror, you'll usually see that if you look real closely, the outer edge of your iris has a little dark ring. So we just want to get this little darker brown ring to give her eyes a little more depth. So this is just, you know, maybe a shade darker than the burnt sienna that we used to base her iris. If you work up a little bit more of this inky dark brown, which is again our mix of burnt sienna and some black, and I keep going off the palette, you'll see if as my hand goes to the right, I'm adding a little water to my brush. And we're going to use this dark brown to outline her eye and do eyelashes. This is a much softer look than if we used black to do the outlining. It gives the eye some definition, but the dark brown just is a little softer. So you're going to outline very finely along the edges of both eyes. And this just makes everything look much more crisp. And then I'm going to sweep some little eyelashes out to either side. And I always keep my eyelashes a little closer, probably to the outer half of the eye. I have them a little shorter towards the top and let them sweep out a little longer as you come down to the corner of the eye. Vary the length, don't make them real even. And you can add some little short lashes right on that lower lid, about maybe 1/4 of an inch in. Here we're going to turn the canvas and add some to the opposite side. So feel free to move your canvas around so it's at an angle that's easy for you to add these lashes in kind of spontaneously. You don't want them to look you want them very loose and fine. And just a soft sweeping curve from that outer edge of the lid. We're going to add some little white highlights to the eye. And I always like to use my liner brush to do the little dots. I can control how big they are. So I'm just picking up a little fresh white on the brush and then add a little streak to the bottom left side of the eye to add some more shine mark. We're going to add the dots to the nose, the bottom lip, the outer corners of the cheeks, and you can just see how that makes her sparkle. Now we're going to start adding some hair, and we're using the burnt sienna, and I'm using a small flat brush and just loosely stroking hair in. Again, I want to vary the lengths. We just want this little fringe of bangs across the top of her head. Just add some more fresh paint to your brush as you need it. This is a very dry, sketchy fringe of hair. We don't want real solid hair. The bottom edges should be sort of feathered. This will be our first pass. We'll add some more later, but we just want to get the indication of where the hair is going to be. And then we're going to add some pigtails. So again, these are kind of loose and feathery, just gracefully arch them out from the sides of her head. Pick up more paint as you need it to darken it in. And again, we're using the burnt sienna. So like little fountains of hair. Now you want to do it on the opposite side, kind of pick the same spot even on her head, and you're going to arch the opposite way. If you trace these little pigtails in, really just give yourself a little loose indication of where they go so that you're not trying to follow specific lines. Your strokes will be more graceful if you let them kind of flow naturally off the brush and the motion of your hand. Okay, now I'm going to add some ears. And again, we're using our Flesh Mix. And I'm using just a small round or flat brush. And we're going to paint in a little ear on either side of her head. These are just kind of a little, almost peanut shape or kidney bean shape. And you want to be careful, you know, trace these in if you want the edges of them, but you want to watch where they're positioned. The top edge of the ear is, you know, almost just slightly above the top of the eye, and the bottom comes down about even with the mouth. So we just want to get these based in with just our middle flesh value. You can see where that makes her start looking like she's not a little alien so much. And then we're going to add a little shading to these. Just add a little bit more burnt sienna to your mix, and we're going to draw in that little shadow under the top of the ear and a little shadow where the ear canal goes into her head. So just continue adding a little more of the burnt sienna. Just, you know, start out light to get you, you know, to give you just an indication. You don't want these to be too dark. And these are just kind of impressions of ears. They're not real detailed. Add some light, you know, you can pick up some of the warm white in your mix. And again, I'm just using a dirty brush, so this is all mixing together. And I'm just going to highlight the top edge of the ear, the inner ear where it wraps around your ear canal, and then kind of the bottom earlobe. So you can see just that little bit of, you know, very loose indication of an ear gives you the effect of an ear. You can see they're not very detailed. We're going to do a little bit of outlining in a minute to sharpen them up, but okay, we're going to use kind of the same color, and we're going to add some highlights in her hair. I'm just stroking down this flesh color at the front, because our flesh color is, again, you know, our mix of burnt sienna and the warm white, and her hair was started out as burnt sienna, so this all blends together. Just stroke that in on her bangs. And then we're going to start adding some darker values to her hair, and I'm using the raw umber. That's the really dark brown. And I'm using like a number 2 round brush and just starting to stroke in to give us some shadows in her hair. And just a little more indication of the individual locks of hair. You can add a little bit more dark on the outer edges to give some shading as it wraps around her head. And we're going to start pulling that hair down closer to her ears. We've got this little bare spot above her ears where we had first started putting hair in. And you can start fringing her bangs a little more. Again, I like the loose feathery edges of her bangs. I don't want them real even, so let some come down a little longer and some stay shorter. You know how little baby girls are. Their hair is very, very feathery, I should say, and loose. So pull that down just to the top of her ears. If you wanted some different colors of hair, just vary your colors. You can, instead of the dark we're going more for brown here, but if you want it blonde, you could use your raw siennas and some warm white, and you still want to put some dark values in to shade it, but you could use something more like the raw sienna mixed in with some of the raw umber to give you a darker value. And then you could use your warm white for your highlights, or even some yellow oxide, because we've used yellow oxide in the design also. I think I'm going to pull some of this down just a little bit more on her forehead. Don't forget our other pigtail. We need some darks in that one. Again, pulled some more down on the forehead, just extending some of those little hairs a little farther down. We want all three values to show, so we still see some of our highlights, and we still see some of our base color of the burnt sienna and some of the raw umber. Now we're going to add some little ties on our pigtails. So we're using our pink mix. This is kind of the deep pink, again on our round brush. And I'm sketching in some loops of the bow and some little tails. You can go over it if you need to. Do the other bow. Again, I sort of like to freehand these because they seem a little more spontaneous than if I was tracing the lines and trying to make my hand follow the line exactly. Again, we're going to do some little tails. And the pink bows kind of pick up our pinks, inner collar and other places on the canvas. We want to highlight these a little bit, so I'm just overstroking with some white, just very lightly and loosely, just running over some of that pink. You don't want to cover your pink totally up, just hit some little highlights so that they pop out more. We're going to do some outlining, and I'm using the burnt sienna to outline her skin and ears and her lips. These are kind of, again, just very soft, loose outlining. Can run around the whole edge of her face. You can see where those little lines just separate her ears, make the edges of her ears more crisp. Now we're going to do just an indication of a shirt on her, just highlighting the sleeves edges with a side load of white. We want her to just kind of stay in the background, so we don't want anything that's going to jump out, because her face is the most important thing, our focal point. We're just adding a little bit of white into her shirts, and she kind of blends in with the butterflies. We want to put in the cuff on her shirt, our sleeve. Again, this is our deep pink mix, and I'm just filling in that little ruffled cuff with 1/4" angle brush. We need to fill in her hand with our flesh mix. And again, on her hand, we're not going to get real detailed. We just kind of want the impression of a little closed hand. She's going to have it wrapped around the little stick that holds the star wand. So we're going to put a little thumb in here and just have the hand come down into the cuff. We'll add a little shading and highlighting in a bit. We're going to paint our star wand stick in with some cerulean blue plus white. We want this to be a light blue mix. Again, we're keeping our colors through the whole palette, the whole canvas all similar, so we're using the same colors over and over. So just line that stick in with some light blue mix, which is cerulean blue plus white. We're going to use a stencil and stencil a star in on the end of that stick. I'm just using kind of a funky primitive shaped star. You know, use whatever stencil you have available. You don't have to use a specific one. Or you can draw your star in and just paint it. I'm going to fill this in with yellow oxide, and you can see I'm pulling in towards the center on the edges of the stencil. You don't want to pull back into the stencil. Keep pulling from the edges in so that you don't have paint built up under the edge of your stencil. Always pull towards the center. We'll get this filled in. This is a quick way of filling in your star, and then we can add another coat once we remove the stencil. Guys, just quickly pick it up, and there we have a star. Now we can fill that in a little bit more. You may need to wait for yours to dry. On, you know, this video I can sometimes stop and start, so it looks like I'm waiting. I'm painting wet on wet, but actually I've given a little time for the star to dry before I put another coat on it. Okay, now we're going to stencil a starburst around the star. Again, we're repeating our stencil that we used on one of the blocks, and just kind of position it, you know, someplace where it looks even. And now we're going to stencil the starburst in with our blue-green mix. We've used the blue-green light and some of the cerulean blue mixed together with some white, and just fill in those stencils. Just be careful not going over top of your yellow star. Just watch where that star shows through your stencil and avoid those dots. I'm using a short round brush to do the stencil, and just doing it in kind of a swirly motion. You don't want any water in your paint. You want it to be fairly dry. Okay, lift up, and there we have a a starburst around the star. I'm going to shade the star with a little bit of yellow oxide and our alizarin crimson. I'm just side loading that using a 1/4 inch angle brush. So just brush mixing those two colors on the palette with a little bit of water in my brush. You can also use some of the blending mix in your brush instead of water. And just come down some of the left edges of the points. It's a little bit more of the alizarin crimson. We're going to shade the back edges of the collar, going right over the polka dots that we put in, and add a little shading to your cuff. I'm going to add some white polka dots to the cuff, and I'm just using the tip of my brush to do that. You need to pick a brush that has a rounded end. And I'm going to also highlight the dots on the collar with some more white. They just didn't seem to pop out enough to me after I put the dots on the cuff. I'd like them a little brighter. Now I'm going to dry brush some white on the star in the center. Again, I'm using the short round. Just scrub that around in a circular motion. Now we're going to side load the back edge of the hand and just add some shading with a little bit more burnt sienna. You know, our flesh mix is burnt sienna plus warm white. If you want a shading value, you just add a little bit more burnt sienna to the mix. If you need a highlight, you're going to go with more warm white in the mix. So now we're mixing up a lighter value, and we're going to use this to highlight the hand. I do a lot of brush mixing. So we're going to highlight the front edge of where the fingers are folding around. And I think the chin could use a little bit stronger highlight after looking at everything else. I'm just popping a little bit of that color on the chin. I'm making some of the burnt sienna kind of mixing some water in to make it inky, and let's do some outlining on our hand. I'm just kind of waving the end here to give the indication of the ends of some fingers. Again, our hand's just very loose. We're not trying to be real detailed on this. You can also use some black to outline the collar and cuff and the edges of the shirt sleeves. And we're going to do a little more detailed outlining on the star one. I'm going to paint in, I've decided I think the butterflies need to be a little more prominent in the design, so I'm going to do a purple body. This is just kind of a wash, and our purple is the mix of the cerulean blue plus some alizarin crimson. I'm just using that on a little round, like number 2 round brush, and just lightly filling in the butterfly bodies. And then we're going to use the same color to do a little bit of shading on some of the butterfly wings. You just want them to just have some little dark edges, little shaded values, and they'll just stand out from the background just a little bit more. You don't have to do every one, just, you know, hit them here and there. And I'm going to add some little pink side loading to some of those little dots that were in the butterfly stencil. They're like a little 3-dot design back in the background. You don't want them to jump out too much, just a little light shading. And then we're going to add a pink center to this little starburst up in the block above the little girl. After standing back and looking, I thought that had just too big of an open spot that I thought it would be good to fill it in. And I'm going to soften the starburst. We're jumping around here on a lot of little details. But I'd like that starburst to go into the background just a little bit more, so I'm just going to lightly dry brush some white using a small flat brush and just soften those stenciled polka dots down. Do a little bit more work on the hand, adding a little more shading. I'm not totally sure that I like the shape of this hand, so I'm going to rework it just a little bit. Sometimes things look okay when I've drawn the drawing, but when I actually start painting it in and see it a little more three-dimensional, it doesn't look right. So I'm going to fill back in a little bit with some of our medium white background to change the shape of this just slightly. You can see how things kind of adapt as I am working a design. So now I'm going to fill back in with a little bit of the flesh mix to change where I think that hand should sort of wrap around that stick, and the thumb should sort of come up in front of it, and I didn't realize that till actually I got it painted in and it didn't look right. So So don't be afraid as you're painting, you know, something, if it doesn't look quite right after you get your colors in, you know, just go back and adapt it a little bit. You can usually tell if something just doesn't look right. In the drawing in your pattern, it should be the corrected shape of this hand, so you shouldn't have to go through this. I'm mixing up some dark pink, and while that hand's drying, I'm going to put in the little bows around the bottom of her wand. So I'm doing little strings that are wrapped around the wand, and then we're going to do some little bow loops. This is a dark pink color. I'm going to do some little streamers that come down, and just keep varying your colors. We want a lot of these little streamers, and we don't want them all exactly the same. So we're going to add a little white highlight, some more loops to the bow. Now we're doing some lighter pink streamers, and again some lighter pink loops to the bow. Paint in all these little filler flowers in your background, similar to what you had previously painted flowers in. And then I'm going back and adding some white highlights to the center. Our blue-green flower up here, I'm doing some outlining just in black. And then on these little centers I painted in on the starburst, we're doing some white circles, or actually they're half circles because these are again, this is very soft. They don't show up a whole lot. You just some little background texture and filler that you have to look at close to see. I'm going to outline our streamers over here with some black just to give it a little bit more definition. We're just running through all these little minute details that finish off the design. This is very fine, just you don't have to outline every one, just here and there, and then add some little sparkles of white highlights.